All right, ladies and gentlemen, as we begin our post-mortem of just another These Mets and Mets, for that matter, as the Mets fall to the San Diego Padres 6-0 in Game 3 of the Wild Card Series. In addition to that, of course, lose 2 out of 3 to San Diego. Their season is over. Before it ever really thought we could get it going here in October, sooner than we all expected. Joining me to talk about that from the Amazin Mets Clubhouse is Rick Laughland. Rick, of course, an author as well, as he has a book on Nets history that is out in Barnes & Noble and Amazon. You can pick that up from Brooklyn to Teaneck. And also he might be working on a very precious Subway Series book at some point down the road as well. That could be coming down at some point.
And I appreciate that, Michael. And I think I found the fill in the blank for the Mets slogan. These Mets are history. It's like a history of the Nets from Teaneck to Brooklyn, because we can get into this, Michael, but that game, and I was at Game 1, of course, of this new wild card format, best of 3 series. Game 1, to me, the atmosphere being in that ballpark and, again, having the opportunity to cover the World Series back in 2015 and be at 3 consecutive games, 3, 4, and 5. That atmosphere was akin to that in 2015. I think this new ownership led by Steve Cohen, a new regime with Sandy Alderson kind of stepping into the background, and Billy Epler, and of course the hiring of Buck Showalter. I think a lot of Mets fans felt like this organization, for the first time in a long time, was pushing its chips in the middle of the table, and this could be a special run for this team. In spite of what happened the past 2 or 3 weeks, in spite of the division slipping out of their grasp, it was October. It was new hope, new expectations that if they, dare I say, get out of a wild card round, could make some noise in the playoffs. But we'll go pitch by pitch if you want, Michael, blow by blow. But that was not meant to be, as the Mets were just outplayed, not only on Sunday night, but I thought throughout both games 1 and 3, which weren't even really all that close at all.
No, they weren't. I mean, there's really not much else to say other than the fact that they just got totally outclassed by the San Diego Padres. And I wasn't so much by the point of the game ending, because basically the game was over in the second inning when the San Diego scored 2 runs. You basically knew, oh well, here we go. This is going to snowball any minute now, and it did. I was at the point of just being like, well, we knew this was coming because of what happened a week ago against the Atlanta Braves, and a lot of people pointed out to that foul ball that Austin Riley just let roll down the third baseline against Mark Hanna as being the beginning of the end, if you will, of the 2022 New York Mets. And then went downhill after that as they lost that game 5-3 to Atlanta, and then obviously lost the division because of that. Ended up in this spot and ended up losing 2 out of 3 to a San Diego team that, for many reasons, other than the fact that the Padres have a lot of boppers in their lineup, the Mets did not match up well with San Diego at all in the regular season, and it certainly carried over into the playoffs. But this game, obviously, a lot of people are going to make a big deal about Joe Musgrove. I think it was obvious he had something on his ear. I mean, I've never seen anybody with a glazed donut around their ear before, like that, like what he had. That's basically what it looked like, and it was pretty obvious. Like he would wipe his shirt sleeve onto his ear when the umpires were actually coming out to look. And we saw in the first inning Buck Showalter, looking at each ball, wondering, what's going on here. And the only criticism I have of Buck Showalter is maybe he should have gone out a little bit earlier instead of the 6th inning to, protest what was going on with Musgrove. Obviously, he was doing something, but at the end of the day, the guy dominated, and the Mets had no answer, and they had no excuse. Even when he left, you were still down 4-0, and the offense couldn't do anything. So it was just a complete flat performance by a team that just, for whatever reason, really from the onset of Game 1, just it felt like they just didn't have the energy. Even in Game 2, it was kind of teetering on the brink at times. They just couldn't match the energy of the Padres.
And I like to your point about Joe Musgrove in Game 3, of course. I mean, I feel the same way, that Buck should have went out there when you had Juan Soto and you had Josh Bell and all the Padres big guns stepping out of the box, trying to throw off Chris Bassitt's timing, which is all gamesmanship. Was it annoying? Absolutely. Even Bassitt after the game tried to kind of deflect those questions. Did it impact your timing and your composure on the mound, which, watching from afar, it didn't seem to help. I think Bassitt, in these last 2 big starts that he had, that being in Atlanta, the second to last series of the year, and then of course in Game 3, left a lot to be desired. I mean, it was just really such, for the Mets overall as a team, was just such a bitter ending to what was a sweet campaign. Because I know, Michael, I mean, I've been watching the Mets growing up from, let's say, the early 90s. Unfortunately, didn't have the opportunity to experience the 1986 World Series, and was too young, basically, at that point to have, been understood what was going on. But having followed this team and seeing them get 101 wins, second most wins in franchise history since the inception of the franchise in 1962, it was a magical season coming up to September. And I was just stunned at the fact that you looked at Max Scherzer, who was in and out of the starting rotation with the oblique. He had some other issues as well. Jacob deGrom, of course, coming back after missing over a full season, basically. So they were able to weather the storm. They actually had, coming out of that series against the Los Angeles Dodgers at home in August and basically looking like the better team, you thought that the Mets were not going to cruise, that it was going to be a battle because the Braves at that point were playing 700 baseball, but you thought they had enough cushion, enough of a softer schedule coming up where they could lock down this NL East. And it was just shocking to me that, losing out of two out of three of the Nationals, getting swept by the Chicago Cubs, all of these winnable games, letting that slip through the cracks, that this team, that's going to fester this entire offseason. I'm sure once the dust settles, Buck Showalter, Pete Alonso, Lindor, the list goes on. They're all just going to go back to some of those August games that they let get away, for the reason why that in the first year, of course, the division tiebreaker is the head-to-head. They found themselves in a matchup with the San Diego club that I think really was remade at the deadline. Like Met fans wanted their team to be remade. They got Juan Soto and Josh Bell, who we saw the damage they did in this series, more so Bell than Soto. But still, it's a bitter pill to swallow. And like you said, Michael, they lost to the better team. They lost to a team with, I would say, more pizzazz and more poised in that moment, because this Mets team, when I watched them over the last 3 weeks, it's almost like the league caught up to how they were playing offense. That if you're a top of the line pitcher and a starter that basically is an ace like Musgrove or you Darvish, if you throw strikes and you go after hitters, the Mets didn't have enough power to counteract that, and that was the case throughout September and then into the series with San Diego.
I mean, a number of things. The problem for the Mets throughout the course of September was this. Well, first, just the Dodgers series. I mean, it felt like Game 7 of the World Series was the day when Nimmo, jumped up over the wall to catch that ball, and you have Timmy Trumpet playing the trumpet. And you have all these. That was like Game 7 of the World Series. Everything else was right downhill for the Mets after that. So I guess Jerry Seinfeld was right in that regard, for that matter. But anyway, I mean, the DH position was a disaster this year. I mean, yes, Vogelback had some nice at bats, had nice home runs, but otherwise was inconsistent. Darren Ruff was basically a non-factor from the moment he came onto the team. Makes you wonder why they traded J.D. Davis to begin with. I thought Davis was a good clubhouse guy. I think not having him there was a problem to begin with as well down the stretch, because he was really good in the clubhouse. You lose Starling Marte to an injury that, you know, obviously really never really truly recover from. You see him air a ball yesterday that leads to a run coming in. And you just have a team that was pressing. I think Alonso and Lindor were pressing a lot down the stretch, especially Alonso, and it just kind of petered out and fell apart. As far as deGrom and Scherzer, we're at the point now with Scherzer. He's 38 years old. You look at the oblique problems he's had. He, was on the IL twice for an oblique. You wonder if he's now breaking down at the end of his career, and then he's still owed, like 86 million dollars over the next 2 years or whatever it is. And then deGrom, sounds like he has one foot out the door, or it's just, typical, agent speak for that matter that he's going with right now. And who knows if he's going to be here. You have Nimmo and Edwin Diaz also and things saying, we love to be here, but if we get the most money on free agency, we're out of here. So, I mean, it's a tenuous situation right now that the Mets are going into, having such a special year, a team that, at the very least, I thought could contend for an NLCS, and it's now looking like a team that could be rebuilding all over again.
And I thought it was very telling with Max Scherzer when he sat down with Ken Rosenthal, and basically that came out about the fact that he didn't think he was going to be fully healthy until getting a full offseason to recover. That to me gave me reason for pause as a Mets fan. I'd go back to the 2006 Mets when it's in September, and all of a sudden you're losing Pedro Martinez for the year, Orlando Hernandez, and of course, how can we forget the Duaner Sanchez taxi cab accident? These small little things that added up over the course of September. And obviously, injuries played a toll with Max Scherzer, and we saw that in Game 1. There was so much chatter before Game 1 about what would the Mets go throw out deGrom in Game 1 and then Bassett in Game 2. I can't necessarily. I can't get inside Buck Showalter's head, and I can't get inside of Max Scherzer's head and tell you what he's feeling. But I almost felt being there at Game 1 at Citi Field, that
Yeah.
he was not himself. He was not right. And I know that he's the alpha in that clubhouse. You know, when you have, like you mentioned, 38-year-old Scherzer on this roster, deGrom a pending free agent, as a Met fan, you have to just be disappointed. And this has to be a what if kind of season because all the ducks are in a row and all the pieces in place to make a serious run. And they didn't do enough roster tinkering. And perhaps instead of Max Scherzer being so prideful and so much ego to go out there for game one, he maybe should have said, look, let me go for game three if it's necessary and give my body some more time to heal.
I wanted to ask you about game one and the atmosphere over there in game one. You said it was like a World Series atmosphere, and then it quickly descended. And I remember talking to you the other day. It descended into total chaos. Everyone was getting booed. I think Cowbell Man got booed at one point. You said the DJ got booed. Emma Stone, of course, who was a big Padres fan. Everyone finding out, I guess a lot of people finding out for the first time that she's a big time Padres fan. She got booed. Everyone was getting booed. Just tell me about what was going on over there.
I mean, again, the pregame pageantry, and of course, you had the SNY studio with Todd Seal and Gary Cohen and the whole crew there, really getting amped up. Jerry Blevins getting everything, the whole Mets fan base riled up, and the anticipation of Timmy Trumpet is Edwin Diaz going to come in the game, and before you could basically get a cold or hot beverage and get in your seat, the Mets found themselves down 2-0, and Scherzer was just. It was from the opening pitch to Profar. It was reminded me of the 2015 World Series. Of course, the first game was not at Citi Field; it was out in Kansas City. But still, you knew when that first pitch from Profar was laced into the outfield that was not going to be a great inning for Max Scherzer. Just like watching Yoenis Cespedes kicking the ball around in the outfield from I believe it was Alcides Escobar of the first pitch of the World Series. You had that same kind of just eerie, like imminent feel of disaster that was coming to this team, and you kind of held your breath and you tried to stay positive. Ultimately, again, it just watching Max Scherzer, he didn't get some calls in that first inning. Go back and look at the game cast. You can see there were 5 pitches that were called balls, 3 of which were just clear cut strikes that could have changed the complexion of that inning. But again, revisionist history. Scherzer wasn't healthy enough. Even if I don't think he would have been able to get into the 7th inning the way he was laboring at that point when they pulled him out. I believe it was in the 4th inning.
Hmm.
And it's just so disappointing because the Mets fans, and there was so much criticism of Mets fans. Why is the ballpark half empty in September in the middle of a divisional race? I think Mets fans were either saving their money, saving their energy, trying to get up for this potential serious postseason run. And it's not the Mets fans who disappointed. Don't listen to what the talk radio says in New York about calling out the Mets fans. It's the players, the managers, the front office, everybody involved with the organization that let the fans down, not the other way around.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, because the fans wanted this as badly as the players did. I think everyone wanted this to happen, and it isn't so much that I heard from one person say on social media say, "Why are Met fans rooting against their team?" Like Met fans are rooting against their team. They're just you know they've been slapped in the face. There's only so many times you can get slapped in the face. In a year where you thought, maybe this is a year where it's, something like the 80s, close to it, if not a World Series, something, as I mentioned before, at least an NLCS appearance. And it just turned into kind of a tease.
And it was a slippery slope right after the trade deadline. It was you saw, if you had it on a graph, it was the Mets, of course, in that big 10.5 game lead, and the Braves were closing ground near the midway point of the year. And instead of Epler trying to do something to put this team over the top with a big bat and some help in the bullpen, they made some of those bargain deals that we've seen before from the Wilpons and from Sandy Alderson. I'll even give the Wilpons credit back in 2015 when they made, of course, that the trade that did not end up working out for the Mets long term with Yoenis Cespedes, but certainly for 2015 and then for parts of that next year when they lost in the wild card round of 2016, he made a tremendous difference. The message that sends the fan bites, even under the radar moves like Kelly and Juan Uribe, got this Mets fan base excited, and it just didn't happen this year. Even though how magical that first half of the season was, it just seemed like a slippery slope, a false slope from grace, and then eventually after spending 175 and 180 days in first place, this team gave you nothing to be excited about after the All-Star break because they didn't improve the team significantly enough to make a serious run.
And they need a lefty bat. And what really, I think, really killed a lot of Met fans was not just at the deadline, but all the flirtations with Juan Soto. You see him, hanging out with Sterling Marte at the All Star game, and he's hanging out with Pete Alonso at the All Star game. You think, oh my God, this is going to happen any minute now. Then they're going to finish this trade, and Juan Soto's going to be a Met. And of course, it never happened. He ends up with the Padres. And obviously the Nationals were going to ask for a king's ransom. So I don't not totally blaming the Mets for not making the move, but it's just those kind of flirtations I think got a lot of hopes up for a lot of Met fans, and it just didn't work out. But even like a Wilson Contreras with the Chicago Cubs, they couldn't go out there and try to get him either. They for whatever reason the market just didn't develop. But now you're going to the off season. I really not only want to see Nimmo and deGrom and Diaz. I want to see those three guys back with the team. But the Mets need a big left-handed power bat to complement Pete Alonso because there's too much pressure on him in the middle of that order. And I want to see what they do with Alvarez and Beatty. I mean, I think those two guys have to be part of the plans moving forward. You know, uh, right from spring training. I think remember a few years ago. I hate to bring up this name, Brody Van Wagenen. But he said, "Hey, if Pete Alonso earns his spot in spring training, he's going to be on the opening day roster." I think the Mets have to have that same attitude with Beatty and Alvarez, saying, "Hey, look, we're going to give these guys a chance. They hit well over 300 on the minor leagues this year, and if they have a chance to make the roster, they're going to make the roster." I think that's the attitude the Mets have to have going with those two guys too.
But when you talk about re-signing him, Edwin Diaz and Brandon Nimmo, who by all indications wants to return to the Mets, you still have long-term extensions that you have to put out to Pete Alonso, Jeff McNeil, who I think are going to be part of the core, if you want to call them the core four of this team. I think they have to be back. But as you mentioned, Michael, they're going to have to add additional pieces to strengthen this lineup. I don't think Starling Marte, despite getting 2 hits in that game one and 2 stolen bases, he did not look like fully healthy. You have to give him all the credit in the world for trying to basically play with a broken finger that took forever for him to rehab and recover from. You're really going to see Epler's fingerprints all over this roster. And again, if they're not careful, they don't bring back some of those valuable pieces we talked about, they could start slipping down that NL East pecking order certainly behind the Braves. And based on what the Phillies do, in this playoffs, they could be fighting with the Phillies for second place if they're not careful.
Yeah, I mean, do I expect the Mets to win 101 games again next year? I don't. I mean, you know, get to 90 wins. This it's been proven once again. It seems like it's proven every year, whether it be the '01 Seattle Mariners won 116 games and didn't get to, excuse me, a World Series, or even the Mets this year winning 101 games. It really doesn't matter how many games you win, just get to the playoffs. Especially now when you have 12 teams total getting into the postseason. So the idea now is, I think, for the Mets is build a team that can sustain itself and really is really built for the end of the year, the last 6 weeks of the season, and going into October. I think that's the lesson that the Mets have to get from this. And hey, look, if you win 100 games, great. If you win 90 games, fine. Just get in and just have a team that's ready to wreak havoc at that point in the year. We could sit here and say, hey, the Mets got hot too early. You know what? A lot of teams can say that. Only one team at the end of the storm is going to say, hey, we didn't get hot early. But the key is just be able to sustain that kind of success when it really, really matters at the last 5, 6 weeks of the season.
So for me, the Mets have to have an added emphasis. Not to say that they weren't trying to win the division this year; they clearly were. But looking based on this wild card round and the unknown, and like you said, Michael, it's all about the matchups. I would try to avoid this wild card as best I could next year, and try to do everything they could to win the NL East. And you actually put this out, I think, on one of your social media channels. I was actually thinking the same thing. The last 3 times the Mets have been eliminated, all of their basically since moving to Citi Field in 2009, the opposing team has celebrated in 2015. Of course, I happened to be there, bittersweet moment on the field when the Kansas City Royals are hoisting the World Series trophy. So they celebrate in 2015. The San Francisco Giants celebrate in 2016 the wild card win. They
Yep.
lost to the Cubs in the next round, who ultimately won the World Series. And then now the San Diego Padres. So it's just, you turn the page from Shea Stadium and now to Citi Field. There have been more horrific and heartbreaking moments at this ballpark than there have been triumphant ones. And this is really going to be up to management and the front office to get this ship back on track, because the Braves aren't going anywhere, and the arrow's pointing up on the Philadelphia Phillies in the division.
And they just made Rob Thompson their full-time manager too after taking over for Joe Girardi. So they're looking good right now. And yeah, Mets the last couple of series they actually won in the playoffs were all on the road. They won in LA in 15, won in Chicago in 2015, and that's it. They have not won a home playoff series. Actually, when you think about it, in 2006 when they beat LA, now I'm thinking about it, did they clinch that on the road? I'm trying to remember now. Now I'm trying to think.
That would have been
the
No, that
NLDS that year.
Ruben,
Yeah,
Ruben Tejada was 2015 with the broken leg with
right.
Chase Utley
But
sliding into him, right?
I'm talking about in 2006 when they played LA. Did they clinch that at home? I forgot.
I thought it was no, I believe it was out in LA, if
Yeah.
I'm not
So if that's
mistaken.
the case, they haven't won a home playoff series since the NLCS in 2000.
Unreal.
Think about that for a second. Mind blowing.
I don't know what again, maybe this was on an old burial ground where they built Citi Field or some kind of curse or hex, but like you said, it just doesn't seem the fans are there. It's not, but I will say after Max Scherzer, they turned on him pretty quickly. But based on the Mets' history, can you really blame them for waiting for the other shoe to drop? And then when it does, there's frustration. This is now 36 years without a World Series trophy to show for. And, the frustration is going to grow year by year by year, especially when you have an owner that's saying we're going to win a division title with division title, but they haven't won a division title. They're going to win a World Series title within 3 to 5 years. Well, next year is year 3. And you hope that, each year they get closer and closer, but there's no guarantee of that based on the players that are pending free agents this year.
Wow. I don't know. Disappointment is the life of these Mets. And that is this podcast. Folks, thanks for listening, and we will talk to you next time.